Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another edition of A Piece of Cake. Sorry, we've been away a few weeks, but we're back now to continue with some really important discussions. I'll hand over to my co-host and brother, Abdurraheem. What are we discussing today, my brother?
Okay, so today, bro, I think it's a very topical and quite important discussion. For anyone who's interested, there is quite a nice article by Dr. Sajid Omar. It's a little bit technical from a fiqh perspective that he published on Islam 21st C that everyone might want to refer to. And I'm sort of come from a little bit from a fiqh perspective. My position is off the back of that, but that's been my position for quite a while now. To sum it up, is that the issue of demonstrations is very much connected to what is customary amongst people, right? So in a land where something like a demonstration is considered a type of, precursor or even a type of khuruj against the ruler, in a Muslim land, that would definitely be something that should not be done. But in a country where this is, literally considered the customary way that populations express their dissent or their, their displeasure or their need of approval or something, and this is a normal part of, the discourse that takes place in that society, then it could either be compulsory, or it could be recommended, or it could be forbidden, but then it's going to be depending on certain circumstances. That's just about demonstrations in and of themselves. Not, this is not bringing in factors like free mixing and various fitnas that may come with it. That's a whole different side of the topic. It's like a little bit like voting. It's like if there's 5 of us and we say, hey guys, who wants to go to get ice cream and who wants to go and get kanafa? Let's have a vote. Is it haram for the 5 of us to have a vote on that? Like, I don't think any person with a brain cell would say it's haram to have a vote like that, to decide things like that. So it's like this issue of voting itself is not haram. It just, the question then arises, under what circumstances may it be haram? And there's certain different circumstances. So I look at it a little bit like that. But I think for me, the real interesting topic, is that even if we say, and this is what I would like to get into, even if we can say, let's just move beyond is demonstrating allowed or not. Let's just move beyond that. This is what the conversation I would like to have. And let's just say is allowed. Do they work? Are they effective? And I think the big question for me, which by the way is also what I actually quite hold on to quite firmly, and my main concern, just to sum it up, I'm going to sum up from the beginning. My main concern about demonstrations is they become a distraction away from doing the things that are really, really important and actually really do bring about long-lasting, permanent change. I don't think that demonstrations on their own do that much. I'm not saying they do nothing, but I think the real danger is when you go to a demonstration, you feel all good about yourself, you think you've done something that's really going to make a change, and it may make a change, but it's not significant. And the really big, hard things, the things that we have to do that are hard and difficult and challenging and take time and money and patience and perseverance, we don't do it because, we just go back feeling all buzzed up that we went on a demonstration and, we've said what we've said. And that for me is the big danger of demonstrations. So straight up from the beginning, that's my main concern. My main concern is not, is it halal or haram or whatever, You know, that I think the real question is, because even with these things, you know, if we could, you know, is there really an overwhelming benefit? This is the question, really. So I don't know, bro, Abdul Haqq, you want to approach it from a different angle? That's good. This is the angle I'd like to come at it from. I've done a quick summary of my position. That's
No,
literally
I
my
think
position. We can talk around subjects like that, but that's it for me.
no, thanks, Jazakallah khair for highlighting and your position. I think there's a number of interesting things you've said there, and I agree with you from the perspective of demonstrations, protests, and vigils when we're looking from a societal perspective. So we're looking from the societal perspective that we're in, and for the reasons that you've highlighted, yes, it's understandable why it would not be legislated and allowed in Muslim countries for the exact reason that you've actually said, and why scholars, when they're answering them, we're referring to fatwa, edicts from the scholars. We've got to bear in mind that those fatwa are speaking about largely are speaking about their own societies. So those who take that position that, oh, the scholars said it's haram and everything like that, what context were they actually speaking in? Were they speaking because in the and even if you say, well, okay, but they were speaking about a Western context and they mentioned the Western context, by them speaking and prohibiting it from a Western context, you've got to think that they're doing that because if they permit it in a Western context and it's taken out of that context and into their own societal context, they could be accused of hypocrisy, all sorts of things like that, and they could be challenged by their own governments by saying they've taken your fatwa in that context and they're saying we need it here now, which is problematic. So I agree with you on that particular perspective. From the previously, many years ago, I would have been of the position, yeah, it doesn't really have any benefit, why are we doing it and everything like that, and the end goal, what do we achieve at the end of that? However, I would say this now, my position has changed, especially with the era of social media, and I'll explain why. Abdurraheem. And I don't know if we're getting into semantics when we talk about protest and demonstrations. Is there a difference between the two? When you refer to one, does it mean a specific thing? When you refer to both of them, it means one and the same thing, and vigils. But for me now, I'm for. I would not tell anyone not to go on demonstrations and protests. Okay, and I'll say why. In the era that we're living in now, I believe that demonstrations, protests, as we've seen George Floyd, as we've seen with what's happening now, it shows a visibility, okay, to those who are being oppressed, that there is support for them, and the scale of that support in order to strengthen, in order for them to understand that they are not alone. So for me personally, I think demonstrations, protests, if you want, are effective in that respect. If you ask me, is it effective with regards to effecting change, okay, evoking change amongst the governments and everything, then I will go back to the 2003 and one of the biggest marches, demonstrations we've seen in the history of the UK prior to the Gulf War. We saw it, that did absolutely nothing. Okay, so I keep that in mind when I say, does it affect policy, legislation, and the like? The answer for me is I'm still out on that one. But from the point of solidarity, from the point of visibility, and when you look at some of the videos of these young Muslims in Palestine, they're asking, they're petitioning, please keep protesting, please keep marching. This is helping us. So we're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth in that regard. So I would say in our societal context, there are too many pros with regards to demonstrating. And I'll stop at this point, Abdurraheem. You mentioned about, because we have some of our co-religionists who are orthodox like we are, no, the mixing and this and that and whatever. But then I would say, okay, we've got to look at the overall good and benefit of that. And we live in a society that's mixed anyway. So if you're going to put that with regards to demonstrations and protests and everything like that, then you've got to be a hermit. You should not move around in society at all, because all of the environments, the workplace, the hospitals, the schools, everywhere you go, apart from the masjid, you can get in the segregation that's there for those masjids that have things for women. Everywhere is of that construct of mixing and everything like that. But if your intention and your goal is to show that solidarity, okay, to enjoying that good, the three levels, enjoying in that good, if you're not doing it with your hands, then with your mouth, if not with your heart, I believe demonstrations fits into the first two levels, depending on what's
And
been done.
I think what we usually get in this situation is, it's like confirmation, classic confirmation bias. Yeah. If I'm against demonstrations, I'm going to look for all the things that are going to, add to my argument as to why demonstrations are,
right,
not allowed. Right. So yeah, demonstrations are haram, and and there's this, and there's that, and there's these things. You understand? But I think it's not very clear thinking. That's why I said you have to break it down from the. So let's just say, okay, let's get rid of all of those things. Theoretically, in theory, yeah. So in theory, if there was a men-only demonstration and all the men went out, and there was a women-only, it was all totally segregated, yeah. Would you say it's allowed then? So why are you throwing? You throwing that in the, like, let's deal with the issue of whether this is allowed or not. But I want to call you on something, bro. Abdul Haqq, I've got to call you up on something, and this is your subject. This is your area of expertise. I want to, and I want to call you on it. So I think that, look, yes, the 2000 and whatever it was, well, I don't remember the Iraq demonstration. 2003, that was one of the biggest demonstrations ever in history, right? No, like 2.5 million people came out, right? So this demonstration that happened today in London was the biggest since 2003. Yeah. Now I agree with that. It made absolutely no difference, shockingly. Yeah. But I think it did make a difference, because what it did is it created a stronger realization of how totally broken the system is. The fact that 2.5 million people came out and they demonstrated and they were totally ignored, yeah, has created a level of disillusionment with the system that just was not there before. Now, in some ways that's got to be a move in the right direction. But what I want to call you on is, I don't think we can just pick on one demonstration. I think we need to look at the history of demonstrations in general in the Western world, and let us ask ourselves, what has the effect? Have they been effective? Have they brought about change? And bro, this is your field, right? So I want to refer you to Martin Luther King. I want you to refer you to the demonstrations that happened, the Million Man March, the walking across that bridge. Where was it, in Georgia?
Selma.
Yeah. And forgive me, I don't know the name of that brave lady who literally refused to move on the bus, which, by the way, was a type of protest and demonstration as well.
Rosa Parks.
Yeah, Rosa Parks. Thank you. So like it's these things, and again, I think you have to highlight what Gandhi did as well, which has become for many people a benchmark. I don't know because I'm always a bit skeptical, of accepting on board, these simplistic narratives. But it seems to be that Gandhi's, demonstrations and his protests and, a combination of things that he did, but a lot of it was to do with peaceful demonstrations and protests and, what they call this passive resistance, civil disobedience. They have shown to be effective in bringing about, maybe not complete change, but certainly bringing about noticeable and discernible levels of change in societies where that is the sort of norm that is practiced. Yeah. So I think to just to choose one example of a demonstration that didn't work and not to go to demonstrations that did. I think, in British history, we have the example, if it wasn't a demonstration, but it ended up being a massacre, the Peterloo massacre, where workers came out protesting against, the terrible conditions and the way they were being treated. And there was a massacre, but it was the forerunner to some change. And they were not trying to overthrow the government. They were just trying to, they were trying to demonstrate for more equitable treatment. I mean, even if you go back in British history to the Peasants' Revolt in the Middle Ages, yeah, this was a seminal moment in peasants' rights, yeah. So this idea that you can't go out and to be honest, I think that you can say whatever you like, even in the context of Muslim nations and this and that. And I know for very strong historical reasons, scholars have a real dislike of anything that sort of upsets the civil order. But there is always a stage where people have just had enough, right?
Right.
And this is the thing. I think that the point is that there's this maturity, I would call it a maturity of understanding,
right.
in the way. Now, we may say that it's manipulation, right? Now, this is a whole nother question, right? See, we could have a really interesting discussion. Is it really that demonstrations make a difference, or is it that they give you enough, yeah, just to keep you quiet for a bit longer? You know what I mean?
And that's
it's
a good point.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. But anyway, let's go back to, so what do you think about Martin Luther King, the whole black liberation
civil rights movement,
demonstrations? Like, it's a history of demonstrations, and
right.
it's certainly brought around change. And they had to be beaten and brutally assaulted, and horrible things happened to people. But at the end of the day, it did. I mean, no one could deny that things are way lot better now than they were, although they're not perfect. So
Right.
I think we've got a long history of demonstrations that have brought about levels of real change. So
okay, let me jump in then, Abdurraheem. I think it's really important. You've answered part of that yourself, and I'm going to go into details there. When we're speaking about the march in Selma, okay, on the bridge, when we're speaking about the civil rights movements that were driven by Martin Luther King, and we see Malcolm X and everything that you've mentioned, and then you said it right there when you mentioned Gandhi, who was a racist, by the way, but that's another subject. But Gandhi, you mentioned demonstrations, and you mentioned other things. You mentioned civil disobedience. So Abdurraheem, the demonstrations and the protests are part of a bigger picture, because civil disobedience, and then you just mentioned at the conclusive part of what you said, and I'm not advocating this, but the change then comes about when there's the risk of violence, or violence ensues as a result of state responses, or that's seen as an agitation and necessary part, because we're going to go to Nelson Mandela as well. We've got to look at what happened with Nelson Mandela and the ANC in apartheid South Africa. Now, bear with me briefly, Abdurraheem, because I want to bolt this all onto a framework, which is, it's easy to discern. I deliver this in training. I've done it across the world and everything like that. There's a model by someone called R.D. Krellenstein, okay? And it's about placing terrorism in context, but forget terrorism. But I want to show you, and this will resonate with many of you. If you imagine two parallel contexts, one that of the government at the top, and at the bottom civil society, and they move according to a horizontal trajectory. So at the government level, you've got politics, policy, they drive society according to that. When civil society doesn't like the politics or the policies, then you've got protests against those policies, against what's happening in the order of the day. Now, what happens then? The next shift across that horizontal is either the security services starting to clamp down on those protesters. Let's think about poll tax and things like that. They start clamping down, and then you'll get a more radical movement progression from the protesting civil society to subversion. Okay, you get more subversive acts, more aggression, more violence, and everything like that. Then after that, you've got security intel now. They're putting in spies, they're doing things to agitate and things like this. We've seen this happen with the police here. That moves it moves from social control and a form of deviance till it gets to what stage, Abdurraheem? There's one more stage that I'm going to mention here, where it becomes either state legislated terrorism from above because of the policies they do to clamp down on civil society, or insurgent terrorism from below, which is then met by the state in that instance. So you've got this movement that takes place. Now, I'll give you examples of how that fits. So Mark Duggan, 2011, after he got shot in Tottenham, look at what happened. And who instigated that? That came from above. The shooting of Mark Duggan, the killing of Mark Duggan, the Brixton riots. It started from above. It moved quickly from protest to subversion, violence, looting, vandalism. Go back to Martin Luther King now. And I'm not saying this is justification. I'm showing you there's a framework and a pattern that you can place. Look at Hong Kong, for example. Those were peaceful demonstrations. Mainland China clamped down, got more violent. The yellow vests in Paris, in France in 2019, peaceful protest, but then you got a more subversive element that started going heavy. And then you saw the state move in tandem, heavier, poll tax, quarreling, all of this stuff. So I'm going really quickly here, but going back to Martin Luther King now, he said something very important. The riots are the language of the oppressed. So the point that you move to rioting, which has happened in our lifetime, and you get the middle class society, white England saying, oh, look at them, they're burning their own environments and everything. That is problematic. But then how do you say marching's not doing anything? We're getting beaten on the marches. That's all that's happening. We're getting arrested. We're being criminalized on the marches. But you know what? If we move to this state to show our frustration, action will be taken. Look at the Brixton riots of 1981. Look at the Toxteth riots of 1981. Look at Broadwater Farm a few years later. Deaths took place in two of the instances. And what we saw in Toxteth, for example, in Broadwater Farm, we saw the killing of a police officer. We saw black women being killed in Brixton. Or what black woman being killed in Brixton. When these things happen, it goes beyond the protest and the marching, and government then starts paying attention. We saw the Scarborough reports after the Brixton riots that highlighted that there's institutional racism. That still happened after Stephen Lawrence, but that was after 1981. That particular report highlighted institutional racism, and there were a raft of recommendations to change. We're not advocating violence, Abdurraheem, but what I'm saying is that civil disobedience is not solely demonstrations, and people move quickly from demonstrations when governments aren't listening.
Yeah, I mean, that it's very interesting, bro. I mean, obviously, I think what you've presented is an analysis of the dynamics of power between, you know, the rulers and the ruled, and you know, I mean, this is just again and again in history, like how are people going to express their frustrations? And you can say all you like. At the end of the day, you can give all the fatwas you like about, you know, demonstrations and civil unrest not being allowed, but I mean, the Arab Spring is another classic example of it. I mean, there's no doubt that most of the Arab world has lived under, you know, had lived, still does under dictatorship for I don't know however long. Before it was colonialism, now it's dictatorship. Very few of them have had even the remotest taste of all those freedoms that they thought they were going to get when they were, you know, when they liberated themselves from colonialism, and it just moved from one type of dictatorship to another, and we've seen it explode across the Arab world, and people, you know, it was horrible. The results of it were I mean, these are the very reasons actually that scholars have said. You look at Syria and they will say, well, this is the very reason that we said, you know, we shouldn't go down that route, because look what happened in Syria, and like nothing has changed. You know, Bashar, you know, Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad is still there. He's still in power, been accepted right back into the, you know, the Arab League, and no real changes. Nothing has happened except lots of people have lost their lives. There's been destruction and horrors beyond counting. What has been achieved? And these are really good, solid points. But I think it shows the difference between, you know, and that's what we have to understand. There is going to be a difference between the dynamics in different societies, right? There are these different societies are going to have these different dynamics. And I think it goes back to the thing is that at the end of the day, you know, I don't know what the word to use, but, you know, governments who are going to get the best, I don't even know, because I'm so skeptical about government, right? Especially today, I just think they are literally, you know, puppets of corporate elites, and they're just trying to leech the people for the maximum. That's what I think is what's going on. I think the whole thing in Gaza is about gas, it's about oil, it's about, you know, a new Suez Canal that they want to put through Gaza. It all comes down to mostly about money, yeah. And the same thing, money, power, and control. And I don't think any demonstrations are going to make any difference, because at the end of the day, when they smell the money, they don't care how many millions of people die, and that's just the bottom line. I just think it's just, that's the fact.
And Abdurraheem, you're right. I think you're absolutely right, and that's why the demonstrations, from the perspective of showing solidarity, and I'm being really specific on this, showing solidarity to the oppressed, just like with the Uyghurs, but there weren't the protests that there should have been. And what we're seeing now, which is different to 2003, the marches against the war in Iraq, is that we've seen every week galvanization of march. And today I have to commend, I was watching very closely, I have to commend the crowds that turned up, the demonstrators that turned up, 300 to 600,000, if not more. And we had governmental agitation, hate marches, they were being called, and defending or bringing alongside that the example that the far right marches were banned. These are that you can't equate the two. But then we saw the behavior of Tommy Robinson and his the people that he got down there, who were basically listening to, it wasn't even a dog whistle cry, but listening to governmental level instigation, as it may be, and that's what it's been called. And we saw that the arrests were being made, over 90 arrests were made there. You could see the ugly scenes of white Britain, working class Britain, attacking the police and saying, basically chanting slogans of betrayal. So my thing is that demonstration there, and the demonstrations that are going on globally for ceasefire, calling for peace, calling out the naked aggression, and understanding what you said about Abdurraheem. It's about oil, it's the gas discovery off Gaza coast and things like this. It's this new Silk Road that Netanyahu wants to carve right through the Middle East if they normalize ties with Saudi Arabia. I've written about this. All of that is what the underlying thing is. Let's be clear, because those who want to divide it and say it's between Muslims and Jews, that's wrong. I say why, because we've got Christian Palestinians.
Bro, I really, literally, sorry, I want to interrupt you. And the reason is, bro, is that not that what you're saying is not important. I want to go back to something you said. I want to ask you something, right? Because I think here is that I wanted to cut in, because I think the heart of this conversation that you and me are having tonight, and what I really want to get, and I want to see what your opinion is, is that, okay, mashallah, I think, so let's go. You said you've written about the new Silk Road, you know about the gas, you know what's really going on, right? And so this is the point that I want to get from you, right? And this is my point that I want to make. I don't think demonstrations are going to do anything to change those fundamental power dynamics. When there's money on that level involved, you can demonstrate all you like, right? And there's also, let's just put into the mix, making lots of money out of selling weapons and arms as well. That just adds more money. So the thing is that, Abdul Haqq, right, is that now when we understand, as we should, what is really going on, and we understand the level at which this is operating, here's my point. This is the point that I want to make, and I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, and I want you to tell me, what do you think is the solution? My point is that the problem with demonstrations is they make us think that we're doing something, they make us think that we're achieving something. And oh, by the way, if we make these demonstrations even more difficult, and we tell the chief of police, you shouldn't go ahead, and like, add a little difficulty level, you think you've just achieved something even more amazing by going on a demonstration. My point being is, Abdul Haqq, when we're at this level, bro, of talking about a new Silk Road, billions and billions and billions of dollars, right? Gas fields, right? New canals that is going to bring billions of dollars to, whoever it may be, then these are the real issues we need to tackle. And demonstrations are going to do nothing to affect that.
I agree.
Here's the point that I'm making, right? Who is ready? You're ready to go and shout and free Palestine, and mashallah, our brothers and sisters in Philistine feel that there's someone with them. But who is ready to put the time and the money and the energy and the effort to build the systems of power and communication and the economic systems and the political systems, yeah. And this is not even to mention, right, how we should fear Allah and how we should be in our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I'm just talking about it purely from a, almost a materialistic level. Who's ready to do that?
Right. So
and you know what? You're
right.
not, are you, bro? When you've been on your demonstration, you feel like good about yourself, yeah? And it's like, you're going to go and sit down. So, bro, what do you think? Because you operate on the fringes of that. That's where you operate, bro, isn't it? That's your field, right? You operate on the fringes of those areas of real power dynamics. You're touching the edges of that. So what can we as Muslims do? Or as human beings who are feeling really disconcerted that people are ready to slaughter other human beings for power and money and resources and all the rest, what is the solution? What are the real things that we need to put in place? What are the real things that, I have a very few ideas, because I'll be honest, I don't have that many ideas. I know that but I'm interested to see, what do you think? What do you think the things that we need to do? And I don't just mean Muslims. I know you're going to say Tawheed and prayer. And
no. That will come to at the end.
Black
No.
people, black people.
Abdurraheem, the deen aspect, and this is all deen that we're speaking about. This is a context we're speaking about. Yeah. The deen aspect and what we should do spiritually, ibadah-wise, worship-wise, we'll talk to at the conclusion, because we'll do a reminder on that. But I think it's a very good point that you're talking about. So, for example, I remember when I was living in Saudi, and I can't remember what you and me spoke about it, or not on. I don't think we spoke about it online, or I saw that you were discussing areas of that. There was a particular organization that had marketed something that was insulting to the Muslim faith, our faith. And I saw the boycott right across the Middle East that crippled this Western American company, that it started coming back with its tail between its legs and pleading because it saw how much was wiped off its shares and everything like that. Now, we're going to get some of our more orthodox say, we shouldn't boycott, and they bring the example that the Prophet ﷺ mortgaged his shield to a Jew and all this sort of stuff there. That's a different context. We need to look at the things that we can do, and you're right that there needs to be, I believe, caucuses, pressure groups, these areas here where we say right now, boycott these areas here with evidence. Okay, this is what they're doing, this is where their finances are going, to boycott and basically pull back. We did, Abdurraheem, you and I did that. I don't know, back in the day of you, that was done with South Africa. I remember I won't buy Apple TVs, I won't buy Reebok products. Look, and what we saw is it started impacting on South Africa. That was one of the factors. Okay, so again, boycotting is one particular instance. Now there's a discussion now. I remember that there were discussions before about voting, and personally, I don't vote. I don't see any of the parties being there in that respect. There, do you know? But there's a difference though now, Abdurraheem. There's a difference. We've seen, whether it's the good or the bad of it, whether we agree or not, we have Muslim politicians now. Okay, we have Muslim politicians who get in on the back of the Muslim vote. Who get in on the back of the Muslim vote.
Even though they're pretty useless, but it shows
they are right. This is the point I'm coming to. This is the point I'm coming to. They should be held to account for their time in office to represent A, B, C, D, whatever. Okay. Now you might say, are you saying that we should vote? If it means it's a pressure vote and you're going to vote for particular Muslims and you're going to say, we're going to hold you to account for this, the next time we may not even vote. Like, you know what? You didn't fulfill. I don't know. I'm not saying that's a conclusive answer, but we have things within our power as communities, as a caucus, to say, do you know what? We're going to move in this direction. We're going to move in that direction politically, but we're going to do it united. Okay, we're going to do it in a united block. So, and then also, Abdurraheem, there's got to be sustainability or consistency. So, for example, if there's a policy in schools that we disagree with, and across the country, you say to me, Abdul, my child, I'm in Yorkshire in this thing. This is what they're doing with my in the curriculum. The teachers, there's only a small community of Muslims here, but we're withdrawing our children. It's the same curriculum that's going right across the country, and we all, the Muslims, would say, we're pulling our children out. And you know what, Abdurraheem? We stick to our guns. I'm referring now to what happened in the civil rights movement with regard to Martin Luther King. We're looking at what happened with Rosa Parks. That what happened? They crippled the bus service, and nearer to home, that happened in Bristol as well. If you remember the racism that took place in the Bristol, there was an incident, and the black community boycotted the bus services until it crippled them. Yeah. So now some might say, okay, but these are small things, they're not enough. Well, it's better than where we are at the moment, because we're all interested in our creature comforts and the little things. I'm still going to go to halal KFC, or if there's a halal McDonald's here, or if there's this product that I really like, I'm still going to buy this product, because me stopping is not going to make much of an impact. That's how divided and self-centered we are as Muslim communities today. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in. So I'm not going to say these are strong elements, Abdurraheem. What I'm saying, it's a start, because at the moment, look at us.
No, and I agree, Abdul. I think, you know what? I think the thing is, what you find when you look at this, it is never one thing. So the civil rights movement in America was not bought, did not advance itself just off the back of demonstrations, right? It was a whole movement. It was a whole plethora of different things.
That's right.
And I think these are the things that, these are the things that are really important. To be honest, I think the scariest things for, the ruling elites are things that are major changes in system thinking. When people start thinking that there is a different system, there is a different way to do things. And I always, I think the Black Panthers, were, having looked at them, absolutely. I mean, obviously, socialist, communist, inspired, whatever. But putting that aside, I mean, just their ability to think outside the box and to do things differently, and the way that they supported their communities on multiple different levels, and the way that they organized themselves.
Abdurraheem, could I interject slightly?
And the way that they created, like, literally independent structures.
Right. Yeah. Abdurraheem, do you know what they represented? Just to interject, I know about the Black Panthers, studied them. And this is the point that I want to bring to us as Muslims as well. They accommodated as well and facilitated for the white communities in those areas. So the bus, the ambulance service that they established, because their sick were not being picked up in the areas they were in. They had poor whites living in the area, and when they saw that it was extended to them, and then look at the other groups that they allied with. They had the rednecks, a redneck group joined with them, okay, because they saw that their fight was against the system, okay. They joined with them. They did a rally. You can see it. You Google it. You'll see, and you'll see the Latino entities. They came together. They might have, as you said, Marxism, communism, but the struggle against the system, they did together. Now, my point on this is, from the Muslim perspective, look at what's happening in the marches now. It's not just Muslims marching. It's everyone. So we need to maximize or capitalize upon that and keep them in the radar of discussions that we're having, to say we are not just speaking about Muslim rights here. We're talking about human rights in the things that we need to be doing societally. We need to be saying to them, look, if we see, for example, what's happening in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and that main ingredient for our phones and laptops and the way they're being exploited, we need to raise that to the attention of the non-Muslim community. When we see some of the oppression that we were seeing taking place with the Irish or with other white communities, you can look in Europe. We need to be saying to them, this is human rights. This is part of our deen, and we need to widen that. And we need to be with them from a point of dawah and solidarity in that. Remember, I told you, and we mentioned this years ago, when I sat in Sheikh Wasi Allah's home and I asked him this question, the ayah, وَتَسِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, or no, bear wa taqwa, to have bear and taqwa, not to do it on ithm and udwan, but do it on taqwa and piety. I said, if there's a common cause in the society that fighting terrorism, for example, that everyone believes in, do we have to only do it with the Muslims, or do we do it with those who align with, we need to keep our society safe, not just against Muslims and extremism emanating from our own communities, but from all extremism. He said, what else does this verse mean? What else does it refer to? So us working for a greater cause and a greater good with the wider society, and on some occasions leading in that with our moral integrity and compass, that's a must, Abdurraheem.
And I think, bro, can I interject? Yeah, go on, bro. Yeah,
there are infrastructures there already that we can influence, modify, and if they're not, then we create them.
Absolutely. So what I wanted to say was to move on to another point now. So and I think this is very important, because I think what I love about this conversation we're having, Abdul, and I'm really vibing with it, is that you and I are at the position where, and I think this has always been the case with us, right, as reverts, as converts to Islam, right, is that we don't look at things simply in a very monochrome way of Muslim, non-Muslim, believer, kafir, right? We look at it from the point of view of, we know there are oppressed people. We know that they're not believers, but they are also oppressed.
Right.
And that is part of what motivates us, surely, as Muslims, is to help everybody who is oppressed. And yes, the greatest oppression, no one's denying it, is to be away from Tawheed, is shirk, is not to be upon Allah's guidance, right? But it doesn't mean that, if you see some person being kicked up in the street, and there's there's 10 of us Muslims walking down and we see some guy having his head battered in, that we're not going to step in and say, stop doing that,
right?
Because we're seeing someone's being oppressed. I remember when I first became Muslim, there was this brother who was a taxi driver, and he basically saw this guy do a runner, and like the taxi, the guy who was in the minicab, and there was someone doing a runner, he didn't check to see, is he Muslim, is he a Jew, is he is he black, is he white, he didn't. He's just said, I'm a taxi driver, this guy's doing a runner, he hasn't paid his fare, we're going to chase him down and make sure he pays his fare. We didn't hurt him or anything. It's just like, we chased him down, stopped him and said, you got to pay up, dude. He's done a job for you. And that was it. For us, that was it. We saw something wrong happening and we felt that it was upon us to intervene,
right,
where we could, and make things right. And this is the thing, right, is that this is not necessarily connected to, are we going to Fajr for the mosque? Are we filling up the mosque with thousands of people in for Fajr? Yeah. Are we fasting? Are we praying? And this and that. Yeah. Okay. True for you and for me and for us Muslims, right? But surely there is the general need for human beings to encourage what is good and forbid what is evil, irrespective of whether you are doing those things or not. And this is not to deny the ultimate importance of those things. They are, of course, ultimately the most important things. But that is not to say that, evil cannot be lessened and good cannot be, promoted, even by people who don't have any deen whatsoever. As the Prophet said, that Allah will help this deen even with a fasiq, right? So, we've seen in history, bro, people who are not Muslim, they're not believers, but they have done good things in the sense that they've contributed.
The New Zealand massacre, what we saw. Look at what that did around the world. And we saw it here in the UK. We had non-Muslims coming to our masajid with placards. We will keep you safe while you pray. And they would be standing outside, non-Muslims in the UK and New Zealand, other places in America, standing outside, women, young children and adults, standing outside masjids, waiting for us to go in and pray and say, don't worry, we are going, because they were shocked at the horror of those attacks then. So you're absolutely right, Abdurraheem. And my thing now is, this is our society. It has its problems, warts and all, but this is where we're from. This is our society. And as Muslims, whichever society we're in, the legacy of our Salaf is that wherever they went into society, they contributed, they participated, and we saw the change across those societies. we've seen the positive impact that's been in this society as well by our presence here. But we're converts. Look at us, we're converts as well. But now you see the title, Revolution or Chaos. Okay. If the demonstrations have around them the steps that you and I are talking about, and I'm sure there are others who will have more. Okay, this is what we can do to evoke change or to keep the pressure on the government. Or do you know what? If particular ministers need to be sacked because of what they've been doing or whatever, that needs to start somewhere. And we need to recognize and acknowledge that. And as you said, and I was really glad you put that out in the beginning, that we're not going to get into the whys and wherefores of, okay, is this haram? It's not haram, and everything like that. Because we've got to look at, remember, there's a thing we've got to take on board, Abdurraheem. In the West where we are now, we know of fiqh of minorities, the jurisprudence of minorities. And that's looking at such a large population of Muslims living outside of Muslim societies and Muslim structures, to give or take to a greater or lesser extent. And that's never happened in the history of Islam. But the fiqh of minorities was always looking, and this is what I liked about what I've been studying around this area, it was always on the back foot. You know, Salman Rushdie and what happened, then suddenly the Muslim identity became more visible because of that, and we need to do more schools, this, X, Y, Z. But now there's a different, the next generation are looking, no, fiqh of minorities is reactive, it's defensive. Now it's a fiqh, a jurisprudence of citizenship, of belonging. And if we belong, we will acknowledge and we will seize upon all of those rights that are there for us as British Muslims. What does that mean? We're no longer on the back foot. We're no longer looking at things in retrospect or looking at things reactively. We can move proactively now.
Okay, great. And so this is really getting to the heart of the matter, right? I mean, the heart of the matter for me, right, is exactly this, bro. And the irony is that I actually think that if we took a look at Israel and the Jewish community, we could take some lessons from that, right? And I'm not talking about imitating everything across board, because there's certain things that we could never imitate. And also, interestingly enough, of course, there has been a huge backlash of practicing Jews and maybe not practicing Jews, but who have stood with the Muslims and the Palestinians and are disgusted by what is going on in Israel, right? But by and large, I think that it's very interesting that how there is the dynamic between the state of Israel as a Jewish heartland and a Jewish homeland, as they see it, and the Jewish minorities living all over the world, and how these Jewish minorities living all over the world have navigated themselves into corridors of power and influence, and their power and influence is really strong. That's why we're seeing people like, government ministers, including unbelievably the leader of the opposition, right? Not even calling for a ceasefire. Like, women and children are being slaughtered en masse and not even calling for us. That's the level of influence, right? Your mind boggles. It's literally, what is going on here? Like, what? Have they got something on these people or something? I don't know. It's like, what on earth is going on, right? Epstein Island and that type of stuff, right? It makes you think. But the point is, obviously there's some things as Muslims we would never do, right? But it's not the point of the actual details of what is being done. The point is, it is maneuvering into positions of influence where, things, and that's what we haven't done, bro. That's one of the things that we haven't done. It goes back to what you said, the fact that we have all of these Muslim politicians, right? So how many of these Muslim politicians have got into power because of the Muslim vote? I don't know. It's an interesting analysis. or have they got into power because they just happen to be Muslims? I mean, they represent all of their constituents, right?
Right.
Not just the Muslims.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
So, you know, you have to remember that as well. So it may be that, you know, they even may, you know, have, you know, let's just say for the sake of argument, it may be that it's a majority of them are Jews who voted them into power, and they expect them to, you know, express support for their position. I don't know. I'm just theorizing. Yeah.
Yes. No, I hear
So
you. I hear you.
obviously, it is a little bit complicated. It's not just as simple as, oh, they're Muslim, therefore they represent Muslims. No, they
Right.
don't. They're politicians who represent their constituent, or are supposed to. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I agree with you.
Although
Yeah.
we can see, on the other hand, it doesn't matter. You know, like I don't know how the Home Secretary is representing really her constituents. I mean, it seems to be, you know, that, you know, senior people in government are representing their own interests or their own family. I don't know. It's like a very strange world. But anyway, bro, I'm getting distracted. The point that I want to make, yeah, is the hard work and the work that takes money. Like, here's the thing, is that it seems to me that the Muslim heartlands, the equivalent, yeah, of Israel for the Jews, the equivalent Muslim heartlands for the Muslims have nothing but contempt for the Muslims living in the West, and think of them as nothing, and don't consider the fact that they have influence and power and ability, because fundamentally they don't really care about Islam. They just care about themselves, right? And this is the problem. This is like, so we have, the problem is, as Muslims, we have a malaise that goes really, really deep. And it goes to the fact that we're not, I do believe that on the level of ordinary people, and this is another beautiful thing, I think one of the things that has happened with everything that's gone in Gaza, it is reviving in the hearts of people the understanding of ummah, what it means to be brothers, to be connected, because we're Muslims. That's a good thing. But I think, unfortunately, and this is a whole nother topic, amongst the many awful things that have infected the Muslims is the disease of nationalism.
Yes.
Absolutely. And this disease of nationalism, and I'm going to say something super controversial. I mean, you will not find me flying a Palestinian flag or a British flag or any other flag. Yeah. And it's not that I don't support my brothers and sisters in who are suffering. Yeah. But do we really want to see another nation state? Do we really want to see another Muslim nation looking after its own interests, unable to cooperate and talk? I mean, I can understand that from the point of view of a Palestinian, what else is there? So I don't blame them for that. But I think ideologically, Abdul Haqq, bro, from the point of view of us thinking as Muslims, we have really got to start the conversation and have this conversation over and over again, right? About the need for us to be an ummah, to be, you know, politically unified, to think of ourselves as Muslims, not as, you know, Saudis and Moroccans and Emiratis and Pakistanis and, you know, whatever. This is a big trick that Shaitan has played on us. And so for me, these are the big ideas. I mean, you know, like you talked about boycotting, and these are practical steps. But also for me, I think we need to really work on the big ideas. We need to think, the other thing that I think is very important is, one of the things that is very clear is that in terms of our access to media, social media, the way that we have been manipulated, the way that our voices have been shut down, the way that we have been censored and continue to be censored. Guys, wake up. When are we going to start doing stuff for ourselves? When are we going to start developing our own communication systems? When are we going to start developing and buying into and contributing to our own social media platforms? How long are we going to remain enslaved just through our own laziness? Because we went on a demonstration and we all shouted and we say, you know, we went home and it's like, yeah, I've done my bit. That's what I'm afraid of, bro. Do you understand? The hard work.
That's a legitimate concern. I think one of the things that I'd like to say, like I watched Jordan's feed
Oh yeah, tell me. What was that?
Of his, and it was good. At one point, he was praying. I'm not sure who the sister was. Maybe his wife. He was there holding the phone and looking at the people going past and speaking and giving some really good insights. And towards the end of the feed, they were filming an individual Palestinian talking about his grandmother and where she was born, the camp she was born in. Her son was born there. He was born there, and he said something that resonates with what you've said. I liked what he said at the end, in that he said that Palestine is not necessarily for Palestine. And he said, and when I'm talking about Palestinian, all of you here and what you're doing, I see you all as Palestinians. And the crowd started cheering at that. So the inclusivity that he was talking about was from the perspective of the struggle, just like we saw with the civil rights movement in the end, just like we saw the shift with Malcolm X, when he had the religious paradigm that he worked according to from a Muslim perspective, but then his other organization was ready to work with other civil rights movements, Christians, black first and foremost, primarily, but he widened his scope in that particular instance because he saw the struggle as the same. He went to Africa, as you know, he saw that the struggle was the same. The African continent, the countries that he visited, were ready to support him because they saw with such a big diaspora of black people in America that it was shameful that America was treating this population in the manner that it was treating it. South Africa, again, we look at those who allied themselves with South Africa from around the world. Okay, we look at other freedom fighters who then became within the realms of no longer being terrorists because the government realized the only thing we could do was speak to these individuals. So Abdurraheem, everything you're saying, I agree. This conversation, what I'm worried about, I'll be honest with you, and I think you may share this. We are led by social media. We are led by the media. One thing we need to consider, Abdurraheem, and I've said this to those I've been speaking to, family and beyond that, and others I speak to on social media, we have to really question ourselves about what is Allah showing us here. Because while we're talking about what's taking place now, only a few weeks preceding what happened that catalyzed 7 October, and I say catalyzed it because they were preceding 75, 80 years, which everyone's trying to wipe under. There's a collective amnesia, okay, or psychosis, Palestinian psychosis of Israel, I would say, in the sense that nothing started before that, which is nonsense, as we know. But what preceded all of that, Abdurraheem, we just had the devastating earthquake and floods in Morocco and Libya, respectively. Yeah. And then before that, we had Syria and we had Turkey. And at the same time, shortly after what happened at the beginning of October, we had the earthquakes in Afghanistan. Why am I bringing these things? These are Muslim populated societies and countries. And we're seeing devastation, loss of life on such massive scales over a course of 6 months. This is a different type, but we've forgotten about what's happened there. Who talks about Morocco and helping with Morocco? Dua for Morocco, Syria, who talks about that? Libya, 10,000 people lost in one region. What is Allah showing us about our own collective amnesia and selectivity, that we are being led by a Western media that moves us around and we move like sheep in that regard there, where we need to be saying, you know what, hold on a minute, the story's not moving on from here. Yeah, because once this passes with Palestine, are we going to fall asleep and look at the next thing that the media leads us to? So you're right, Abdurraheem, media needs to be a focus. But even though we haven't got media control at the moment, those of us who are on social media, okay, who've been speaking as effectively as they have the interviews we've been seeing, that needs to continue, that we need to keep having these dialogues, and these dialogues need to move towards action. What are some practical steps? One day you and me might say, right, we're going to do a piece of cake and we're going to meet in this particular center. And the idea of meeting this particular center is we're going to discuss ABCD from maybe one of the most popular shows, and we're going to see what is actionable from what we've said, and we set up a group and they work on that, and we reflect and we review, we analyze. Is it working? The plan that's been implemented, is it working? Do we need to tweak it? And imagine those offshoots coming from the discussions that, not you and me, who are we? all the other discussions that are taking place, and everyone's looking at this podcast and it's good and we're sharing it and everything like that. But where are the actionable items from these discussions that we are having?
Absolutely, bro. And this is it for me, is that this is where we seem to be falling very short, in my opinion, you know. But, you know, Allahu alim, anyway, bro, you know what? I think we've had a great discussion. It's very late where I am now because I'm in Turkey at the moment. So it's like getting on till way past midnight. And I think it's been an amazing discussion, as always, one of our best. I think this has been really fruitful. There's clearly a lot we could talk about. I just hope the brothers and sisters who are listening, it's given you some food for thought. I do just want to remind myself and everybody else is that the real change that we want, the sort of long-lasting change, is going to take a lot more than demonstrations. I'm not criticizing anyone who went on a demonstration. Yeah. But if that's all you've got to contribute and you think that you've done enough going on a demonstration and you've done your bit and you can just not actually contribute to things that make really significant changes, then I'm sorry, you've been taken for a ride. Yeah. And you may have given a little bit of hope to the Palestinians and they saw all of everyone standing there and it's given them a bit of a spark, but it'll soon fade after the next round of bombing tomorrow. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like we need to make sure this doesn't keep happening. That's what are we doing to make sure, that when the ceasefire comes, if it comes, what are we doing to make sure it doesn't happen again? In 3 years' time, and we'll be going through the same thing again. What are we doing? What systems, what processes, what efforts are we making? Because that's what happened. Out of sight, out of mind. And as Abdul Haqq was saying, the next thing comes along and the next thing and the next thing, and we're just moving.
And Abdurraheem,
go on, bro.
What I want to conclude on is with that, is that, yes, as Abdurraheem has highlighted correctly with regards to demonstrations, but as I heard from one of your in-laws yesterday in the khutbah, which was really good, Atif was down in my neck of the woods again, and he said something which I think I agree with, and you would, Abdurraheem, is profound. He said, yes, the Palestinians are being tested, but are we not being tested more than them with regards to what we are doing with our deen and the comfort that we're living in? And also, this is what I would say in conclusion. Those who are saying, which some are saying, we're protesting because we want the government to hear what we're saying and everything like that. And all I would say is this: what are we doing? Because if the government aren't listening, there's something that you can do that will be listened to. If we're getting up or before we go to bed and we're calling upon Allah, He listens. And there is no more effective listener than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no one or nothing more able to answer our petitioning than Allah. The question is, are we just focusing on what society has given us?
Yeah.
When we should be focusing on what Allah has told us repeatedly in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we can this is my thing. I tell you, do a personal demonstration in your prayer. Do a personal demonstration when you're in sujood. Do a personal demonstration before you go to bed, if you're able to, and if you wake up in the night, or when you're doing you're praying and you can get up in the early hours of the night. Do that demonstration. Remember, solidarity for the Palestinians, but petition Allah, because with certainty, where you don't know with regards to the governments, that Allah is hearing you and will answer your dua, even on behalf of the oppressed. And I will conclude with that, Abdurraheem.
I think it's a great conclusion, bro. So let's fill up those masajid for Fajr and Isha, especially, inshallah. And no, that's fantastic, bro. Jazakallah khair. I think you finished it on the best words. Inshallah, I'm sure next week, inshallah, if we can coordinate it, because we have had little apologies that we haven't been on air that much recently. But yeah, we'll have another amazing and interesting discussion. Abdul Haqq, it's been a pleasure as always.
Likewise.
and we'll look forward to next week. And brothers and sisters, thanks for tuning in. May Allah bless you for all your comments. And we'll see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.